Filthy trash. The words cracked through the air like a slap. Gerald didn't move. He just stood there, his hands gently gripping the top of the worn canvas sack that hung from his shoulder. That sack held everything he owned, every scrap of memory, every proof of survival. The woman in front of him stood with one hand on her hip and the other stretched out like she was casting judgment. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, expensive workout gear. She was the kind of person who liked rules, but liked enforcing them even more. "You've been hanging around here for days," she said, loud enough for neighbors to hear. "This is a gated community, not a public park." Behind her, 2 HOA board members stood awkwardly. One whispered, "Should we call security again?" "I already did," she snapped. "And this time, we're not just asking him to leave." Gerald didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that words didn't change minds like hers. Silence had more power. But a few car lengths away, a sleek black SUV had just pulled to a stop. The driver's door opened, quiet, deliberate. Keanu Reeves stepped out. No fanfare, no bodyguards, just a quiet man walking with purpose, and he was walking straight toward them. It had started 3 days earlier. Back then, Gerald had arrived in the neighborhood quietly, with no plan beyond survival. He wasn't looking for handouts. He didn't carry a sign. He didn't even ask for water. He just walked. The streets were pristine, pressure-washed sidewalks, identical flower beds, trimmed hedges like something out of a brochure. Gerald moved slowly, not just from fatigue but from habit. After years on the street, you learn to carry yourself like a ghost. Stay invisible. Don't linger. But he wasn't invisible, not here. The first person to notice him was a jogger who crossed to the opposite side of the street without a word. She didn't look at him, just sped up as if his presence alone was an inconvenience. The second was a mailman. He gave a slight nod. Gerald nodded back. The third was Debbie Sterling. She watched from her porch, eyes tracking his every step like a hawk. Gerald didn't glance her way, but he could feel it, that cold suspicion disguised as neighborly concern. The next morning, he walked the same route, searching. Someone had told him his daughter, Amaya, might be living in a nearby complex. He hadn't seen her in almost 10 years. But hope has a funny way of surviving in people like Gerald, even when everything else is gone. He passed a small neighborhood park just after sunrise and found a bench beneath the trees. He liked the sound of the wind through the leaves. It reminded him of his grandmother's land before the world got complicated. That bench became his pause point, a place to think, to write, to gather his bearings. He wasn't asking for anything, but it didn't take long before the HOA decided he was the problem. By the end of that second day, Debbie Sterling had already begun her campaign. First came the whispered warnings to neighbors, then the group chats, "Has anyone else seen this man? And we may have a vagrant issue forming." She printed out blurry phone photos. She recited HOA rules like scripture: loitering, trespassing, disrupting the peace, though Gerald hadn't said a word to anyone. And that night at the HOA meeting, Debbie stood up with her phone in hand and addressed the board. "I have concerns," she said. "This man has been spotted wandering our streets multiple times. He sits in the park for hours. I believe he's homeless and possibly dangerous." One of the board members asked, "Has he done anything to anyone?" "No," Debbie replied, "but he's making people uncomfortable. That's enough." Some heads nodded. No one pushed back. She was already planning his removal. By Friday, the energy in the neighborhood had shifted. Gerald could feel it, the way curtains moved when he passed, the silence that followed his steps. People weren't ignoring him anymore. They were watching. He sat again on the park bench and pulled out his notebook, the one with his daughter's name written over and over again in tight, careful letters. Amaya. His hands trembled slightly as he wrote, not from fear, from memory. A boy rode past on a scooter and waved. Gerald gave a soft smile and lifted a hand in return. "Dylan, come here," a woman shouted from across the street. The boy stopped, startled. His mother rushed over and pulled him away, never taking her eyes off Gerald. That night he slept behind the park's utility shed. It wasn't safe. But it was quiet. The next morning they came for him. Debbie arrived just after 8. 2 security guards flanked her, not police, but HOA hires with badges and reflective vests. One held a clipboard. The other had a phone, already recording. Debbie led the charge, heels clacking across the concrete path. "There he is," she said, pointing as if Gerald were some kind of escaped pet. "That's the man I reported." Gerald stood up slowly. He didn't look surprised. "I'm asking you to leave this community immediately." Debbie said. "You're trespassing." Gerald kept his tone calm. "I haven't harmed anyone, I'm just passing through." Debbie stepped closer. "You don't belong here, you've been warned." "I serve this country," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for anything." "You served," she mocked. "Is that supposed to mean something?" One of the guards shifted uncomfortably. The other kept filming. Gerald stared at her, unblinking. "It means I don't owe you fear." Debbie raised her voice. "Well, in 5 minutes someone who doesn't care about your war stories will be here. And they'll move you out." And that's when the black SUV pulled up. No one noticed at first, not until the driver stepped out and began walking slowly toward the confrontation. Back in the present, the group turned as Keanu Reeves approached. No one said a word at first. His steps were quiet, his presence calm, but something in his eyes silenced the air. "Is there a problem here?" Keanu asked. Debbie blinked. "This is private property," she said, though her voice had lost its edge. Keanu looked at Gerald, then at the guards, then back to her. "I think it's time you walked away." There was no anger in his voice, just certainty. For the first time in days, Gerald felt something he hadn't felt in years, safe. Keanu didn't linger after those words. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He just turned slightly, gesturing for Gerald to follow him. Gerald hesitated, his eyes still locked on the woman who'd been screaming at him minutes earlier. She was frozen now, unsure whether to retreat or double down. Keanu didn't wait for her to decide. He simply walked, his hands in his jacket pockets, calm as ever. "Come on," he said again, quietly, and Gerald followed. They walked a full block in silence. It wasn't until they rounded a corner and the HOA's little audience was out of sight that Gerald finally spoke. "You didn't have to get involved." Keanu gave a half shrug. "I know." Gerald looked at him. "Most people don't." Keanu glanced over, his expression unreadable. "I'm not most people." They reached a quiet stretch of road just past a community garden. Keanu leaned against a low wall and took out a small water bottle from his jacket, handing it over. Gerald accepted it without a word, took a long sip, then sat down. "My name's Gerald," he said eventually. "Gerald Mays." "Keanu," came the response with a small smile. "But you probably knew that." Gerald chuckled just once. "Didn't expect you to be the one stepping in." Keanu shrugged again. "Didn't expect to find you out here, but I go on walks when I can, helps clear my head." Another pause. Then Keanu asked, "You live around here?" Gerald shook his head. "Not anymore. Used to live about 6 towns over, before everything fell apart. You looking for someone?" "My daughter. Haven't seen her in years. Got a tip she might be living in one of the apartments near this area." "You think the tip's real?" Gerald sighed. "No idea. But it was enough to make me move my feet." Keanu nodded slowly. "That's hope. That kind of hope it's not easy to carry." Gerald looked away. "I've carried heavier." Keanu didn't press. He let the silence sit. Gerald appreciated that more than he could say. He was used to people either prying or pretending he didn't exist. This was different, quiet, human. Eventually, Keanu said, "You served?" "Yeah. Desert Storm. Then 2 tours in Iraq. Wasn't even supposed to re-enlist, but the second time I didn't have much waiting for me back home." "You make it back okay?" Gerald looked down at his hands. "Physically." Keanu nodded, eyes steady. He understood what that meant without a word needing to explain it. "Had a job at a body shop when I got back. Good people, decent pay. But the economy hit and they downsized. Couldn't keep up with rent. Then came the drinking. Then came the rest." He paused. "That's the short version." "It's enough," Keanu said. "You don't have to explain your existence to anyone." Gerald looked at him again, and this time he really saw the man, not the movie star. Not the face on a billboard. Just a guy who'd lived a lot of life and seen enough to not judge anyone for theirs. Down the street, the same HOA security cart rolled by slowly, just once, then disappeared again. But they didn't stop this time. Not with Keanu standing there. Gerald shook his head. "Funny thing is, I didn't even want to come into this neighborhood. I was skirting around it, but I saw the park bench and I needed a place to think, just for a while. And they made you the enemy." "Yeah," Gerald said. "To them, people like me aren't supposed to exist. If we're out of sight, we're not a problem. But if we show up on their manicured streets, suddenly we're a threat." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't want pity, I don't even want help, I just want to be left alone." "Is that so hard?" Keanu's voice was quiet. "Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is asking to be left in peace." Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, silenced the screen, and tucked it away. "You hungry?" he asked. Gerald blinked. "What?" "There's a little cafe down the road, outdoor seating. Good soup, my treat. Gerald hesitated. His pride flared up for half a second, then cooled. He nodded. Yeah, that sounds all right. The cafe was quiet, tucked between a yoga studio and a tiny bookstore. No one bothered them. A few people recognized Keanu, but no one approached. Maybe it was the look on his face. Maybe it was the way he sat next to Gerald, like it was the most normal thing in the world. They ordered soup and sandwiches. The waitress didn't flinch when Gerald set down his sack beside the table. For the first time in a long while, Gerald ate slowly. Not because he was worried about rationing, but because he could, because no one was rushing him away. Keanu let him eat in silence, only speaking once Gerald set his spoon down. I'm glad I was there, he said. Gerald gave a slow nod. So am I. Later, as the sun dipped low and the sidewalk shadows stretched, Gerald stood. I should keep moving, he said. There's a church 2 towns over. I heard they've got a decent outreach program. Maybe they can help me find Amaya. Keanu stood too. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope, handed it to Gerald. What's this? Just a name. Someone I know. Works with a nonprofit, veteran-focused. She won't ask questions. Just tell her you spoke with me. Gerald looked down at the envelope, then back up. You always do this. No, Keanu said. Just when it matters. They shook hands, and for the first time in days Gerald smiled. Back near the HOA's perfect little world, Debbie Sterling sat on her porch, scrolling through footage on her phone. She had half a mind to post it online. Vagrant harasses residents, refuses to leave. She could edit it, frame it her way. But the moment she saw him, Keanu, stepping into frame, calmly confronting her, she froze. She deleted the video, not out of guilt, out of fear. Gerald walked until the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows over cracked pavement and chain-link fences. His stomach was full. His mind wasn't. The name Keanu had given him rested in his coat pocket, carefully folded like it might crumble under the wrong touch. He hadn't opened it yet, not because he didn't trust the offer, but because it was hope, real hope. And sometimes that's heavier than the sack he carried. He slept under a bridge that night. The concrete was cold, but the sound of passing cars helped him relax. It meant the world was still moving, and so was he. But that was just the beginning. Want to know what happened next? Well, before we dive in, if you're enjoying this story and love such dramas, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber keeps me motivated to dig deeper, uncover more wild stories, and bring you even crazier content. Your support means everything. It's what keeps this channel going strong. And trust me, there's plenty more chaos coming your way. Back to the story. The next morning he woke to the sound of boots. 2 pairs, authoritative, fast. By the time he sat up, a flashlight was shining directly into his face. Get up, now, Gerald blinked. 2 men in black tactical gear stood over him. No police badges, no official vehicle in sight. Just a white pickup truck parked across the road with tinted windows and a blinking dashcam. He raised his hand slowly. What's this? You're trespassing, one said. The voice was gruff, impatient. We've had reports. You match the description of someone harassing residents in the Fair Pines community. I left, Gerald said. 2 days ago. You've got the wrong, don't move, the second man barked, reaching behind him. Gerald didn't resist. He just stood still as they cuffed his wrists too tight. His sack was tossed to the side like garbage. Then came the words that made his blood turn cold. You think a movie star can protect you forever, old man. An hour later, he sat in a folding chair inside a garage. Not a precinct, not a jail. A garage, unmarked, concrete walls. Smelled like paint thinner and cheap tobacco. One of the men was pacing. The other leaned against a metal table, arms crossed. I don't know who you think you are, the pacing one said, but people like you. You don't get to stir up trouble and walk away. Gerald stayed quiet. The seated man leaned forward. She called in a favor, said you were threatening her board. You think because you served you're above the law. I think this is illegal, Gerald replied calmly. You want to talk legal? The man snapped. Let's talk trespassing, loitering, harassment. I walked on a sidewalk, Gerald interrupted. Watch your tone. The silence grew heavy. Then the garage door creaked open behind them. A figure stepped into the light. It wasn't a cop. It was Debbie Sterling. She wore the same sunglasses, even indoors, and held a clipboard like it was a weapon. Is he talking? She asked. One of the men shook his head. Debbie approached slowly, like a lion circling a cage. You should have stayed gone. I gave you a chance, but you had to make a scene. Now I get to decide how this ends. Gerald stared at her. This is kidnapping. No, she said sweetly. This is community protection and you're a safety risk. He didn't speak. She stepped closer. You know what happens to people with no address, no lawyer, no name in the system? They vanish. Back at Keanu's house, he was finishing a call with someone from the nonprofit. He hadn't heard from Gerald that sat wrong with him. He'd seen men like Gerald vanish before. Not in movies. In life, quiet men. Dignified men. Unwanted by the world the moment they stopped fitting its perfect mold. He called the cafe. No one had seen him since. He called a few shelters. Nothing. Then he did something he rarely did. He pulled a few strings. Within hours he had footage. Not from the city. From a private business across the street from where Gerald had been seen. The footage showed a white pickup truck, 2 men, and Gerald being shoved into the back. Keanu stood up from his desk, grabbed his jacket and left. Back in the garage, Debbie leaned over the table and whispered, "You think some Hollywood actor gives a damn about you? He forgot your name the moment he walked away." Gerald raised his head. He didn't look angry. He looked resolved. "I've been through worse than this," he said. "Not with me," Debbie replied. And then a knock on the garage door, 3 precise taps. Then silence. The men tensed. One walked over, opened it a crack and froze. Keanu Reeves stood there, calm, still, staring into the darkness like he knew what was inside. The man muttered, "You can't be here." "I can," Keanu said. "And I will." He stepped through the door. The second man moved to intercept him. Keanu didn't flinch. "I've seen war zones cleaner than this," he said, eyes scanning the setup. "Sir, we need you to leave." "You're not cops," Keanu cut in. "You're private security operating off-record, detaining someone without legal cause." He pulled out his phone. "And I've already sent this address to 3 attorneys and 2 journalists." Debbie stepped out from the shadows. "This isn't your business," she said sharply. Keanu turned toward her. "You made it my business." The next hour moved fast. The men backed down once Keanu made a few quiet calls. Gerald was uncuffed and escorted out. The white pickup vanished. Debbie tried to scream about defamation, about outside influence and fake veterans. No one listened. Gerald walked beside Keanu in silence again. But this time it wasn't shame holding him up. It was dignity, and it was growing. That night, Debbie sat in her home office, deleting emails and clearing her phone. The footage she'd planned to leak gone. The phone rang. An HOA board member. He told her she was being asked to step down. No discussion. No vote, just an order. She hung up without responding. And for the first time in years, Debbie Sterling felt something new, irrelevant. Across town, Gerald sat at a shelter, not a cot on the floor but a guest room in a transitional home for veterans. He unfolded the envelope Keanu had given him. Inside was a phone number and a handwritten note. "Hope doesn't end just because it gets quiet. Call her." Gerald looked out the window. He didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in years he wanted to find out. The phone in Gerald's hand felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, just the weight of what it represented. A door, a risk, a chance to believe something might actually go right this time. He looked at the number Keanu had written on the card. No name, just, "Tell her I sent you." He sat on the edge of the cot, heart steady but cautious. Veterans learned not to expect miracles. Hope was always a luxury, one you didn't carry unless you were willing to get burned. But still, he dialed. It rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. "Phoenix Outreach. This is Lee." Gerald hesitated. I was told to call." "Said you help guys like me." "Who referred you, Keanu?" There was a brief pause on the other end, not confusion, recognition. "Okay," Lee said. "Can you tell me where you are?" Within an hour, a van from the outreach center arrived. It wasn't flashy. No logos. Just quiet dignity, the same kind Gerald had been clinging to for years. Lee met him at the door. She was younger than he expected. Early 30s, maybe. Strong voice, steady hands. The kind of person who doesn't flinch when someone's been through hell. She didn't ask 100 questions. She didn't demand he pour out his life story. She just said, "You hungry?" He nodded. They drove in silence for a while, stopping at a local diner, the kind of place with worn leather booths and mugs that never go empty. Over meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Gerald began to speak. Slowly at first, then more, about the war, about Amaya, about how it all started unraveling, and Lee just listened, not with pity, with respect. At the outreach center, things moved fast but not rushed. Within 2 days, Gerald had clean clothes, a checkup from a volunteer nurse and a simple room of his own. Nothing fancy. Just a mattress, a desk, a closet, and a door that locked from the inside. He hadn't had that in years. They gave him space, but not distance. Every morning someone greeted him by name. Every night someone said goodnight. That kind of routine small human started stitching something back together inside him. On the fourth day, Lee returned with a file folder. "We did some digging," she said. "Your daughter, Amaya." Gerald sat up straighter. "She's living in Riverfield, about 40 miles from here, working at a medical supply warehouse, single, no record of marriage." Gerald's throat tightened. "Does she know I'm alive?" "She hasn't listed any next of kin since 2015, Lee said carefully. "But that doesn't mean she wouldn't want to know." He nodded slowly. "I don't want to just show up." "You won't have to," Lee said, sliding him a small prepaid phone. "We reached out through a contact, left a message. It's up to her now." That night, Gerald sat by the window of the center and stared at the quiet street. He thought about the park bench, about Debbie Sterling's voice calling him filthy trash, and then he thought about Keanu. About how one man choosing to show up at the right moment had turned everything around. He didn't feel saved, he felt seen, and that he realized was enough. Meanwhile, across town, Keanu sat in a quiet cafe corner with Lee. "You did good," he said. She smiled. "You did better." Keanu shook his head. "All I did was show up." "That's more than most," Lee replied, "and more than enough for Gerald." Keanu sipped his tea. "You think she'll call Amaya?" Lee asked. "Hard to say. That kind of silence runs deep, but I have a feeling." He nodded, then stood. "Let me know when she does." 2 days passed, then 3. Gerald didn't ask for updates, but every time the phone lit up he looked. Finally, one morning, while pouring coffee into a chipped mug, the screen lit with a name he hadn't seen in a decade. Amaya. He froze. The phone rang once. Twice, 3 times he picked up. "Hello." There was a pause, then a voice small but clear. "Dad." Gerald sat down, his hand trembling slightly. Yeah, it's me." She didn't cry, neither did he. But there was something in the silence between their words, a bridge being rebuilt slowly, plank by plank. "I got your message," she said. "I wasn't sure if it was real." "It is." "Are you okay?" "I am now." They talked for 23 minutes about her job, about her mother, about where things went wrong and how maybe they didn't have to stay that way. Before hanging up, she said, "Do you want to meet?" Gerald nodded, voice soft. "I'd like that." Later that afternoon, Lee found him sitting on the bench out front. "She called, huh?" she asked. Gerald nodded. "I'm meeting her tomorrow." Lee smiled. "You ready?" He looked down at his hands. "Not really." Then he looked up. "But I'm going anyway." The bus ride to Riverfield was quiet. Gerald sat by the window, sack in his lap. He still carried it, not because he needed to anymore, but because it reminded him of where he'd been, and how far he'd come. Each street they passed looked more familiar. He remembered coming here years ago, before things fell apart. Before the silence between him and Amaya had stretched so wide they couldn't even see each other from opposite sides. Now they were closing that distance. The bus pulled into a small depot just past noon. Gerald stepped off, adjusting his coat. It was cleaner now. Lee had given it to him the day before, along with a simple note. "You're not just starting over, you're walking back into your own life." Across the street, a woman waited on a bench. She stood when she saw him. Amaya, older now, strong. Eyes that carried the same quiet fire her mother used to have. They didn't run to each other. They just stood there for a long second. Then Amaya crossed the street and wrapped her arms around him. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she whispered. "I didn't think I deserved to," Gerald replied. "You're here now," she said. And that was enough. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking, talking, no apologies, no speeches, just little pieces of memory passed back and forth like loose photographs being laid out on a table. Amaya told him about her job, her apartment, her favorite coffee place. Gerald told her about the shelter, about Lee, about Keanu. "That really happened?" she asked, smiling a little. "Swear on my sack," he said. She laughed. A real one, the kind he hadn't heard in over a decade. Back at the outreach center, Lee picked up a letter that had been dropped off that morning. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, neatly folded. "To whom it may concern. Consider this a personal donation to the Phoenix Outreach Foundation. For Gerald. For dignity. For the next one who just needs a chance." Attached to it, a cashier's check, 5 figures, signed simply K. Reeves, meanwhile, back in Fairpines, things had shifted. Debbie Sterling's name had been quietly removed from all HOA documentation. A new president was appointed. Younger, more empathetic. Word about the garage incident had gotten around, not from the media but through whispers, from someone who'd seen the footage, someone who didn't delete it. Residents started questioning the rules, started looking at the people around them a little differently. One man began leaving bottled water by the park bench where Gerald used to sit. No one moved it. No one complained. A few weeks later, Gerald stood in front of a small duplex just outside Riverfield. Amaya had helped him fill out the forms. Lee's nonprofit had co-signed the lease. His name was on the mailbox. Mays. He unlocked the door. It was simple: a couch, a stove, a place to sleep. But it was his. He set the sack down gently near the door and took a deep breath, the kind of breath that fills a man's chest not with air but with peace. That weekend, Amaya brought over dinner. As they ate on mismatched plates at a borrowed table, she looked at her father and said something he never expected to hear. "You know, Mom used to tell me stories about you, about the man you were before." Gerald looked up. "She always said, no matter how far you fell, you'd find your way back. You just had to remember who you were." Gerald swallowed, nodded. "I think I finally did." A few days later, Gerald sent a letter, just one, handwritten, tight lettering, folded with care. "Keanu, I don't know how to thank you. You didn't save me, you saw me. That was enough. That was everything. Tell Lee she saved me too. She gave me room to breathe. My daughter and I are talking again. There's still a lot to figure out. But I've got a roof, a bed, and a reason to get up in the morning. That's more than I've had in a long, long time. You were right. Hope doesn't end when it goes quiet. Sometimes that's just when it begins." Mays. Keanu read the letter in the quiet of his study. He folded it once, placed it in a box with a few others, letters from people he'd crossed paths with, people who mattered, people who reminded him why showing up matters. He didn't text Gerald back, didn't call. Some moments don't need noise. Just a little silence, and the knowledge that something good happened. And in Fairpines, the bench where Gerald used to sit still stood under the same tree. One afternoon, a boy on a scooter rolled past it. He stopped, picked up a bottle of water someone had left there, then looked around and said, to no one in particular, "Thanks, mister," and rode on.